Ethiopia, where the earth keeps its oldest secrets. Before there were nations, before there were names for rivers or gods, there was this. A crack in the earth's skin, widening slowly beneath an African sky, and something walking upright across it for the first time. Ethiopia does not announce itself with the polish of a postcard. It arrives instead like a memory older than memory itself. Dust and incense, stone churches carved downward into the ground rather than raised toward heaven, salt flats that shimmer like a mirror held up to nothing. This is a land that has never been colonized, never fully mapped by outside hands, never entirely explained. 9 major climate zones exist within its borders, from frost-bitten peaks to some of the hottest inhabited places on the planet, and within that range live more than 80 distinct peoples, each with a name for the horizon that no dictionary can fully translate. Empires rose and fell here, while much of the world outside still had no written word for empire at all. Christianity arrived early, took root, and never left. Islam arrived early too, and settled into the same soil without ever needing to conquer it. What secrets does a country keep when it has watched over the birth of the human species itself? Follow the rift southward, into the cradle. Follow it north, into fire. This is Ethiopia. In the Awash Valley, the wind moves low across a landscape the color of dried blood and old bone. It was here, in 1974, that a team of paleoanthropologists knelt in the dust and lifted fragments of a skeleton more than 3 million years old. They named her Lucy after a song that happened to be playing in their camp that night, a small, almost accidental act of naming that gave a face, or at least a shape, to humanity's earliest known ancestor. Her bones are small. Her stride, scientists believe, was already upright, somewhere in this valley, long before writing, before fire was tamed, before language had words for grief or wonder. Something like a person stood and looked at the horizon the way we still do. The Great Rift Valley cuts through Ethiopia like a wound that never fully closed, a place where 2 tectonic plates are slowly tearing the continent apart, millimeter by millimeter, over millions of years. Geologists call it the beginning of a new ocean. To the pastoralist communities who have lived along its edges for generations, it is simply home, a place of volcanic lakes stained pink with flamingos, of acacia trees bent sideways by wind, of children herding cattle across land their ancestors walked in exactly the same way. Further south, in the Omo Valley, time folds strangely. Here live some of the last communities on Earth who still mark adulthood, courage, and beauty according to traditions unbroken for centuries. Among the Harar people, a young man proves his readiness for marriage by running across the backs of cattle, bare feet finding balance on moving, breathing animals, while the entire village watches in silence and then erupts into celebration. Among the Mercy, women wear clay lip plates, a practice rooted not in spectacle for outsiders, but in ideas of identity and status reaching back generations. To walk through the Omo is to understand that Ethiopia is not one culture wearing one face. It is more than 80 ethnic groups, each with its own language, its own gods, its own way of greeting the morning. Anthropologists still argue over what Lucy's discovery actually proved, whether she walked fully upright, whether her small brain masked a mind already capable of tool use, whether she belonged to a species that was our direct ancestor or simply a close cousin lost to time. The debate matters less, perhaps, than the fact of the find itself, that this valley, dry and unglamorous to the untrained eye, held the answer to a question humanity had been asking about itself for centuries. Local Afar communities, who had walked this same ground for generations without knowing what lay beneath it, later gave Lucy a second name in their own language, Dinkinesh, meaning, "You are marvelous." 2 names for one skeleton, one scientific, and one born of wonder, sitting comfortably together the way so much of Ethiopia seems to hold contradiction without strain. Even now, new fossils surface here almost every field season, each one nudging the timeline of human origins further back or sideways, forcing textbooks to be quietly rewritten. Paleontologists describe the sensation of finding a hominid fragment not as triumph, but as recognition. The strange vertigo of holding a piece of someone who once stood, exactly where you are standing, and felt the same relentless sun on their skin. The valley does not ask to be understood quickly. It only asks to be witnessed. Travel north, and the land begins to rise. Ethiopia's highlands climb into cool air and sudden cloud, and somewhere within them sits a town that seems, at first glance, unremarkable, until the ground opens beneath it. In Lalibela, 11 churches were not built upward from the earth, but carved down into solid volcanic rock, hollowed out block by block, until entire cathedrals stood freed from the stone that once buried them, their roofs level with the surrounding ground. Local tradition holds that King Lalibela, exiled and poisoned by a jealous sibling, fell into a death-like sleep and was carried by angels to Jerusalem, where he was shown a vision of a new holy city he must build upon his return. Whether myth or memory, the churches themselves argue for something beyond ordinary human effort. Constructed in the 12th and 13th centuries, using only hammers, chisels, and unimaginable patience, connected by tunnels and trenches that still smell of cold stone and candle smoke 800 years later. At dawn, pilgrims in white shawls press themselves against the walls of the Church of St. George, its roof shaped like a perfect cross when viewed from above, and they pray in Ge'ez, an ancient liturgical language few outside the clergy still speak fluently. Their voices rise and fall in a chant that predates most of what the outside world calls medieval history. Can a place remain sacred simply through the accumulation of so much repeated devotion? Engineers who have studied the site still marvel at the logistics involved. Workers first excavating a wide trench around a chosen block of volcanic rock, then hollowing the block inward and downward, carving windows, columns, and vaulted ceilings from the solid stone without a single seam, a single joint, a single piece added from elsewhere. A mistake could not be patched. It could only be lived with, forever, in stone. That the builders achieved this with such precision, across 11 interconnected structures, still strikes modern architects as closer to devotion than engineering. Outside the churches, the town itself moves at the pace of ritual rather than commerce. Vendors sell dried chickpeas and rolled injera bread from woven baskets balanced on their heads. Children chase each other between grazing goats, and every so often, a procession of deacons in embroidered robes passes through, carrying ornate silver crosses that catch the light like small suns. During the festival of Jenna, Ethiopia's Christmas, tens of thousands of pilgrims arrive on foot from villages days away, filling every courtyard and rooftop until the entire town seems to breathe as a single congregation. Standing in Lalibela's cool stone silence, the question answers itself. Northwest of Lalibela, the earth keeps climbing until it becomes something closer to sky. The Simeon Mountains rise in jagged escarpments and knife-edge ridges, their peaks catching the first and last light of each day in shades of copper and violet. This is the roof of Africa, where the Simeon fox moves like a rust-colored shadow through highland meadows, and troops of gelada baboons, found nowhere else on earth, graze on grass in numbers that can reach into the hundreds, their chests marked with a strange patch of exposed red skin that early European travelers mistook for open wounds. Farmers here have carved terraces into slopes so steep that from a distance they resemble the rungs of a ladder leaning against the mountain itself. Life at this altitude is unforgiving. Thin air, sudden hailstorms, nights cold enough to crack stone. And yet villages have persisted here for centuries, their round thatched homes clustered together against wind that never fully stops. Shepherd boys, some no older than 10, walk these ridgelines alone for days at a time, guiding flocks between grazing grounds their families have used for generations, carrying little more than a wooden staff, a woolen cape against the cold, and an intimate knowledge of which slopes turn to mud after rain. They know the calls of lammergeier vultures overhead, the way city children know traffic sounds, background music to an entirely different kind of life. Conservationists who work in the Simeon describe a delicate balance here, one where farming communities and endangered wildlife occupy the same steep terrain, sometimes in tension, more often in a wary coexistence that has held for centuries without the fences or borders used elsewhere in the world. At the edge of Ras Dashen, Ethiopia's highest peak, clouds gather below the summit rather than above it, an inversion that makes climbers feel, for a brief and disorienting moment, as though they are standing not on a mountain, but on an island afloat in a white and silent sea. If the Simeon Mountains are the roof of the country, the Danakil Depression is its basement, one of the lowest, hottest, and most hostile landscapes on the planet, sitting more than 100 meters below sea level in the far northeast. Here, sulfur springs bubble in shades of yellow and acid green that seem almost artificial, as though painted rather than formed by geology. The air smells of rotten eggs and scorched mineral. Temperatures regularly climb past 50 degrees Celsius, and yet people live here still. The Afar, salt miners who walk for days behind camel caravans, hacking slabs of white mineral from the cracked earth by hand, exactly as their ancestors did 1,000 years ago. At Erta Ale, one of the few permanent lava lakes on Earth, molten rock churns and glows red against the black volcanic night, visible for miles across the desert floor. Pilgrims of a different kind climb here now, not for salvation, but for the raw, humbling sight of the planet's interior laid bare. The salt itself, cut into uniform slabs called amoles, was once used as currency across the region, traded hand to hand for grain, livestock, and cloth, long before coins reached these highlands. Even today, caravans of several hundred camels and donkeys make the journey from the salt flats to highland markets, a trek of several days across ground so hot it can blister the soles of shoes not built to withstand it. The Afar guides who lead these caravans navigate largely by memory and by stars, since shifting dunes erase any fixed path within days. Their tolerance for this landscape is not indifference to its danger, but a kind of hard-earned fluency, passed from parent to child, the way other cultures pass down language or song. It is easy, standing at the crater's edge with heat pressing against the skin like a hand, to feel that Ethiopia does not merely contain ancient history. In places like this, it is ancient history, still actively being written into the crust of the world. Northwest across the highlands lies Axum, once the capital of an empire so powerful that the 3rd century Persian prophet Mani listed it among the 4 great kingdoms of the world, alongside Rome, Persia, and China. Its wealth came from trade, ivory, gold, incense, flowing through the Red Sea port of Addis and outward to Byzantium, India, and beyond. What remains today are towering granite obelisks, some over 20 meters tall, carved to represent multi-story buildings, complete with false doors and windows, monuments to kings whose names have mostly been lost to time. Ethiopian Orthodox tradition holds something more extraordinary still, that the Ark of the Covenant itself, carrying the original tablets of the 10 Commandments, was brought to Axum by Menelik, the son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, and rests there to this day, inside a small chapel, guarded by a single monk, chosen for life, forbidden ever to leave the grounds or show the relic to another living soul. No archaeologist has confirmed it, no photograph exists, and yet generations of Ethiopian Christians have built their faith around this unverifiable, unphotographed, deeply guarded belief, a reminder that some truths are held not through evidence, but through devotion passed hand to hand across centuries. Axum's kings understood the value of permanence in other ways too. They minted their own coinage, some of the earliest in sub-Saharan Africa, to bear inscriptions in multiple languages, a practical necessity for an empire trading simultaneously with Greek merchants, Arabian traders, and Indian sailors who arrived on monsoon winds. Archaeologists have unearthed coins here, stamped with Christian crosses dating to the 4th century, evidence that Ethiopia adopted Christianity as a state religion decades before Rome itself, under King Ezana, whose conversion is remembered locally, not as foreign influence, but as an inevitable turning already underway. Wander the modern town today, and children play football in the shadow of stelae, older than most of the world's surviving architecture. entirely unbothered by the weight of history pressing down around them. East across the highlands, past terraced farmland and eucalyptus groves, planted a century ago to hold back erosion. The land drops toward Harar, a walled city so dense with mosques and shrines that local tradition counts them by the dozen within a single square kilometer. Harar has long stood as a crossroads, a Muslim holy city predating much of the region's written history, its narrow alleyways painted in shades of turquoise, coral, and ochre that seem to hold the afternoon light long after the sun has moved on. At dusk, a stranger practice unfolds just outside the old city walls. A hyena man crouches in the dirt, calling into darkness, and from the shadows come Ethiopia's spotted hyenas, not hunted, not feared here, but fed by hand, mouth to mouth in some cases, a tradition generations old, born from a belief that feeding the hyenas keeps them from turning on the town's livestock and children. Tourists gather with nervous cameras. The hyenas approach anyway, drawn by ritual and routine rather than any illusion of tameness, their eyes catching torchlight like small coins in the dark. By day, Harar moves to a gentler rhythm. Women in bright headscarves sell chili peppers and coffee husks in the market at Feres Magala, calling out prices in Harari, a language spoken almost nowhere else on earth. Weavers work basket patterns passed down through families for generations, their fingers moving faster than the eye can follow, dyed reeds forming geometric patterns that once decorated the homes of the city's oldest merchant families. The scent of hot, a mild stimulant leaf, chewed communally across the region, drifts from shaded courtyards where old men gather each afternoon to talk, argue, and doze through the day's worst heat. It is a relationship built on mutual wariness and old agreement, not so different, perhaps, from how Ethiopia itself has long negotiated with forces far larger than itself. Return, at last, to Addis Ababa, a capital city that did not exist before the 1880s and now sprawls across hills at nearly 2,500 meters, one of the highest capitals on Earth. Its streets carry the noise of a nation moving forward, construction cranes, minibus horns, the smell of roasting coffee drifting from doorways, for it was here, in Ethiopia's highland forests, that coffee itself is believed to have first been discovered, centuries before it reached Yemen, Istanbul, or anywhere else the world now drinks it each morning. And yet Addis Ababa also holds the past inside glass cases at the National Museum, where Lucy's bones, the very ones lifted from the awash dust half a century ago, rest beneath careful light, 3 million years old and still, somehow, at home. Nearby, the headquarters of the African Union rises in glass and steel, a modern symbol chosen deliberately for this city because Ethiopia, alone among African nations, was never carved up by colonial powers during the continent's long occupation. That single historical fact shapes how many Ethiopians speak of their own identity, not as something granted or restored after foreign rule, but as something that simply continued, unbroken, through every era the rest of the world calls modern history. In the market at Mercado, said to be one of the largest open-air markets in Africa, spice traders and textile sellers haggle beneath corrugated roofs in a dozen languages at once, proof that this continuity has never meant stillness. What does it mean for a country to hold both the oldest human ancestor ever found and one of the fastest-growing cities on the continent within the same short drive? Perhaps it means that Ethiopia was never simply a place on a map. It is closer to a long, unbroken sentence, still being written by rift and rock, by monks and mountain farmers, by salt caravans and gelada troops, by every person who has ever knelt at Lalibela's stone or stood at Erta Ale's molten edge. The earth keeps its oldest secrets here, not locked away, but lived in, daily, by the people who never left. North of Axum, past terraced hillsides gone gold with teff at harvest, the road climbs toward Gondar, a city that once served as the seat of Ethiopian emperors for more than 2 centuries. Its skyline breaks the expected rhythm of the highlands. Turreted stone castles rise behind crenellated walls, their silhouettes closer to something imagined from a European fairy tale than to any stereotype of an African capital. Built beginning in the 17th century by Emperor Fasilides and expanded by the rulers who followed him, the royal enclosure at Fasil Gebi houses palaces, banquet halls, and a stone library, each structure blending Portuguese, Indian, and local Axumite building styles into something that belongs, in the end, only to itself. Emperor Fasilides is remembered for more than architecture. Local tradition holds that he built his private bathing pool nearby, not simply for leisure, but as a site for the annual celebration of Timkat, Ethiopia's dramatic reenactment of Christ's baptism. When the pool is filled with water, blessed by priests and thousands of the faithful leap in together at dawn, soaking robes and shouting in a single unified voice that rises above the castle walls. The stone basin sits empty most of the year, its walls green with moss and climbing fig roots, waiting patiently for that one January morning when the whole city arrives at once. Craftsmen still work in Gondar's old quarter, the way their ancestors did, forging silver crosses and hand-beating copper plates in workshops barely wide enough to turn around in, the ring of hammer on metal echoing down alleys that have carried the same sound for 300 years.